Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Wrong Idea. In case you're unfamiliar, being wrong is about embracing subjective experience over objective truth. We're not interested in being correct, we just want to explore our own insights and opinions. I'm Jack, hanging out with my brother Lucas. What's on your mind?
Hey, well, today I'm thinking a little bit about story structure, which has been on my mind because as of late, I've had a story that I'm wanting to write, and I don't do a lot of creative writing. So I've been looking into different structures that can help me frame my story in an impactful way.
Interesting. I don't know a whole lot about this because my only writing experience really comes from the sort of classic English writing classes that we have at school, and maybe very little writing of rap lyrics when I had my stage in seventh grade, which was interesting. But I'm curious because you said impact. What do you mean by you wanted it to have an impact?
Well, so, story is difficult in that you can have a concept for something that you think is cute or unique or interesting, but to be able to turn that into a complete story that can be told over a novel or a screenplay, there's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of material, and to be able to have an arc that is interesting to readers or viewers is uh, not straightforward, and there is well understood literature about how to make stories that are engaging and exciting and how and make the audience feel something. That's what you really want to get out of it.
I'm just going back through old movies that I've watched and thinking of aspects that have made them really captivating or engaging. And I'm remembering that I watched The Godfather for the first time maybe 2 days after watching Michael Mann's Ferrari, which was an interesting movie. And Dad had pointed out this interesting parallel between the two movies, where there's the scene where in The Godfather, Michael is just going out and taking out all of the adversaries that his family wanted him to take out during the whole baptism. And that happens in the movie Ferrari, where Michael is cutting back and forth between this scene in the church and Maserati trying to take the lap record from him. And it's very much so this same sort of sequence of going back and forth between the church and this intense action scene, because it's an interesting artistic choice to make, right? And it's those choices that really make like great screenplays or good novels to write, right?
Maybe I know what you're talking about, but to me that feels more like a stylistic choice, um, more than storytelling, in the sense that there's the way you present the story that has been written, but then there's also the underlying structure of the story. And I think this is an important point to make because there is sort of the skeleton of the story, and then you still have to put on all of the tissue and the muscles and everything else to get the full human. You know what I mean? The full picture, the full product.
I mean, I like this distinction because I think it's interesting because there's for sure a difference now that you mention it. I'm thinking about it, and the presentation aspect of it is a little bit easier to get across when you're trying to get a screenplay out of it. But I don't know so much personally how much you need to have like a story written out before you do your like screenplay aspect of it and whatnot. But do you know how much of a like overlay there is between those two of like writing it sort of in a like just a story arc style versus doing it in a screenplay style?
I'm not entirely sure what you're asking here, but let me break down a couple of things. I would say that every writer is going to have their own methodology and their own opinions about how to do these things. There are definitely similarities in processes, but I would say for one thing that yeah, usually there's a decent amount of planning before you even can get to the writing stage of what are the important beats in this story. What are the events that are going to take us from the beginning to through the middle to the end. So some people will write comprehensive outlines. Some people will do full short treatments that are 10, 20, 30 pages that like capture the essence of the story, and then we'll use that to sort of build up and write the particular scene, the details. And it's so interesting. We can get into this later, into like actually what makes good writing. But yeah, I think that there is plenty, and this I would applies to writers of novels as well. You're definitely, to sustain a story for that period of a full book or a full movie, you need to understand where your story is going if you're going to write effectively. So many writers will run out of steam halfway through something because they didn't figure out what the important beats were they needed to hit along the way to sustain themselves from beginning to end.
So, do you think that's a different thing from burnout in the situation? Because I mean, I think there's got to be a part of writing a story where maybe someone will, get to a point and they would have figured that they would have had something come up to them after, and then maybe they would have thought of a natural, either maybe they've gotten to a climax, they can think of a natural resolution, or they've just gotten too tired on a project at that point and they don't want to continue. So do you think there's any overlap between those 2 points?
So I want to distinguish what I'm talking about as literally the writer running out of story. Like, you can't, at a certain point, if you don't have enough sense of the events of the story and you've only got a few pieces, what you're going to try to do is you're going to try to write what you have and connect the pieces together. And what you'll end up with is, okay, by the time I've connected things together, oh, this turns out to only be like, 70, 80 pages when I need 110 or 120. And there's just not enough story in there to get you through. That I think is a fairly separate thing from burnout, in the sense that we're not getting tired. We're literally running out of material. We haven't done enough work up front to make sure that our story can last us through the length of what we need. But I will say that hitting a block like that can be frustrating and can then lead you to feel like, oh man, this is harder than I thought it was going to be. This is taking longer than I wanted it to. I'm not sure if this is worth it. And then you can start to burn out if you're just feeling like you're constantly blocked. And one of the best ways to deal with that is just to do that work that we were just talking about, the preparatory work before you actually start writing, because writing itself is a whole discipline that needs time and dedication. And if you don't have enough to sustain you through it, if you don't have the bones there in place, it can be it can lead to that feeling of burnout where you're like, man, this is just too tough. And it's because maybe you didn't put in the work up front to allow you to do the writing the way you needed to.
So this begs another interesting question. If you find that you've run out of story and you need to extend it, right? You gave the anecdote of maybe you get to 70 or 80 pages and you need 110. Is there a lot of room in there to try and extend it out, or do you think that that sort of process can sort of create those like dead moments in movies or books when you're reading them, just so that they are longer than, the short period that they were?
I think that's exactly right. I think you're spot on with that. What happens is you'll get a writer who gets 70, 80 pages, and then they're like, "Oh man, this I need this to be longer. Let's stretch it out." And it's like, "No, no, 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 no." Like, the problem is you don't have enough story, and if you're just going to try to make that story last longer, then it just gets even worse. It gets boring, because it's like, not only did we not get a fully satisfying story, but it took forever for you to tell it.
So now this begs another question. How do you think you create more story?
This is a very interesting question. And the it's not necessarily about taking okay, so it's for me it's about the elements of an interesting and a compelling story. Knowing what emotional journey you want the audience to go on, figuring out the meaning that you intend in your story. If you're writing a story, chances are what that means is you've got something to say. You want to tell people something. And in order to do that, you're going to tell them a story. So if you can get a really good sense of what it is that you want to say, then you just need to figure out the right scenario to illustrate your point, and the right characters to embody those beliefs in a way that is compelling to the audience, in a way that is unique to that situation. They're the only characters that could be in that situation to make that point. You know, you've got to solve this. This is the riddle of the story for me, and I think that it's a much more challenging thing to do than, I don't know, math problems where it's like, you know, there's a very clear, well, I don't know, I mean, this is a hard analogy, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, in sort of this algorithmic thinking, you're often looking, okay, I have this information, I want to get to this information, I need to fill in the gap, fine, but every step is somewhat reasonable. You kind of know what tools you have at your disposal. And in writing, you're like, okay, I want to tell the audience something. I have a message that I want to send. How can I best convey that message? And what happens is that journey of learning what it is you want to say and how you want to say it is, I think, the most important part of the writing process. If you can do that effectively, that's where good story is generated. So I would say, in answer to your question, if there's not enough story, it's because you don't yet know enough of what you want to say, or you haven't figured out how to say it effectively.
Okay. This also makes me think about character development in a sense, because you have to intertwine how your characters go through this story, let alone how your story is told. And I always notice, we talk about it a lot, that sometimes when you watch movies and you feel like the plot isn't very well developed, that there seems to be a lack of character development or evolution throughout the story. And I wonder if there's an aspect to it, I think there almost must be, where when writers are trying to think of their story, they are forgetting that the point is that the characters and their emotions and their experiences should try to reflect, their message, rather than like where the story in itself is going. Do you see what I'm thinking here?
Yeah, so I think that in building characters, what we are really doing is finding barriers for, sorry, boundaries is the word I wanted. Boundaries for belief systems. We kind of have these little mini belief systems that we want to embody, and we want to put those characters in conflict where their beliefs are being challenged, and they need to understand the impact of, what if what if my belief is wrong. And to me, that's how this whole thing fits together. You've got some plot, some story, that things are going on in the world. This is the objective experience of what's happening. And then there are the characters, which are the subjective pieces, and they're the ones experiencing these things, and their inner journey needs to play well with the outer journey, the objective. So it's this interplay between our subjective experience and the objective truth. And we want to see how these characters with a particular experience would approach a problem that exists outside of themselves. And how would that problem impact their belief systems? So, in order to, and this is what I mean about, you have a message you want to send to the audience, that there's some belief that you have. And oftentimes what happens is you believed something different prior to some experience. And then after that experience, you believe something else. And that belief is what you want to get across. You want to explain to people, maybe you should consider this other idea instead. So how do we build characters around this idea? Well, we need to have characters that embody the idea we want, and we need to have characters that embody the beliefs that are opposed to that. We want to have characters that have beliefs that are similar to that, and we want to have different people pursuing different goals, and how they pursue those goals and interact with each other helps illustrate the beliefs, the differences between them that we want to, that help underscore the point we want to make. Does that help at all?
Oh, absolutely. It's making me think back to the math analogy that you made, because to me it is very much so like you're trying to solve pieces of a puzzle, and all of these pieces which go into this puzzle are like sort of always changing. So you're trying to solve an ever evolving and ever moving puzzle. And doing that seems just incredibly complex and difficult to do, because I think writing maybe an essay with a goal it would be a little bit more like solving a math problem. I'm doing argument in my AP language class right now, and I get the feeling that, okay, I have this prompt. I need to break it down. I know what I need to do to it, and I know where I need to end up. Like, I need to argue for maybe a point or against a point, or I need to say whether a quote applies to modern society. And it's writing, but it's not storytelling, right? And I think there's that distinction there. And I think that writing in itself could be a little bit more like math, where you know what tools you have. You have your whatever it is. I'll say, like, you have sentence starters, you have your you got your little bits of commentary. You might have transitions that you want to go to keep it sounding academic and engaging. But when you're telling a story, everything is possible. So you don't really have any set tools. Like, you do in a sense, but they have to be different and situationally dependent. So the world of possibilities is now becoming wide open in my brain, and it sort of just seems like trying to look at the stars.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. There's so much in there that I want to unpack. Let's say, so first of all, I understand where you're coming from with the writing you do in school. To me, there was one formula that applied to writing, and it was like, what's what's your hypothesis, what's your evidence, and how do you conclude your argument? And that was like, if you just did that those things, like, you could basically pass any writing test.
Oh, absolutely. They've literally just told us CER, claim evidence reasoning. That's every paragraph, and that's it.
Oh yeah, and well, see, even on the paragraph level, sure. Like, you can. I'm just saying, like, the whole point is, like you said, it is formulaic. Kind of writing is not particularly. It's a very different kind of writing than stories. And in stories, like you're saying, the fact that you have all of these things that could, all of these possibilities, like you're saying, it's literally this world, and that's some writers will get into this thing where it's like, they'll build these characters and they'll come up with this world for them to be in, and this conflict for them to be involved in. And what'll happen is you try to let these characters just evolve and figure out what they would do if you put them in this situation. And in doing so, you end up writing, and the characters, it feels like, decide what happens next in the story. You actually let your story drive itself, and this is what comes of doing the right work ahead of time to actually know who your characters are and how they would react, what motivates them, what are the what's their purpose, how do they approach things, what's their methodology, how do they evaluate the results of their actions, all of these different components. So yeah, it is extremely challenging because often as a writer you may not know what happens next, and you have to write to figure out, obviously, as I'm doing this, it's like, oh yeah, this, if I was this guy in this person in this situation, if I was thinking this way, this is what I would do.
Huh. So this is making me think of something, because I touched on earlier not having enough story, but you talked about letting your story drive itself in a sense. And for whatever reason, that made me think of what happens if you get too much out of your story. It seems to run too long, and there are too many things that you're trying to convey in your message. Do you think that's a could also come from a lack of knowledge of what you're trying to say, and that you're rambling on, but it could also be the fact that maybe your point is a little bit too complex to try and convey, and you got to simple it down? Or where does that balance fall?
Yeah, these are all great questions. I think absolutely a writer who doesn't understand exactly what they want to say. And by the way, I don't think, I mean, again, every writer's going to have their own opinion, but it's like, do I actually ever know what I really wanted to say? I don't know. But yeah, so you can get caught up in trying to say something, but you haven't distilled it down into really the crux of what it is that you want to say. Or maybe it's just, yeah, it's just an idea that lives a little bit fuzzy in your mind, and then you write a lot and you end up having to trim things down. That's a fairly common occurrence. The key is to be able to look at your story and figure out, okay, there is sort of a minimum set of things I need to illustrate to make this point. Maybe some of these things are redundant. Maybe I'm making the same argument twice, and or these two things are similar enough where one of these interactions already makes the point. And even if the other one is fun, it's not necessary to the story. You really have to start looking at, okay, if what I've written is too long, where are the parts that are unnecessary? And you have to be willing to sometimes take out scenes that you might really like, things that are, you wrote and felt really, really captured some piece of what you wanted to say, but you realize, oh, I already made this point earlier, and this is just being here is taking up unnecessary space, and you have to be willing to let go of it.
It's like as if you have, like a child which you're trying to build into like a full-on adult, and eventually there are bits and pieces of it which you have to like scrape off or lose as they grow and evolve, and eventually it's sort of like literally quite like you said, it's a skeleton. It's like you're building a human. There's bits and pieces of it which you're going to lose as you go, like literally your teeth are the only thing. So like, can you get those teeth out of there at the start to fully evolve this thing into a fully grown person? And I think that there's got to be a part of this process, because I've never gone through it myself, where you have realizations probably about your own beliefs and your own experiences, because they're being reflected in this story that you're telling and the experiences which the characters themselves are having. So to me, it makes me think of how does maybe just not even necessarily trying to write a story for storytelling purposes or to make it into a screenplay, but maybe writing a story to try and see things from another angle that is also your own at the same time. You get what I'm saying here? So, people who have gone through things can try and come up with characters and aspects of story which they think could relate back to their own lives. And then they can put them in this universe and imagine their own experiences, which feel somewhat similar to their own.
Yeah, writing can be very cathartic, and I think absolutely doing that, going through that process is a chance for you to learn and understand and clarify for yourself what it is that you're feeling and thinking, and what you believe. That when I say that you have something you want to say, like I was saying, it may be that you figure out that what you end up wanting to say is not what you thought you wanted to say, and that probably happens more often than not. So I would say that that's part of the fun. That's actually maybe the whole reason that most people end up writing is because it gives you a way to express yourself that forces you to really dig deep and figure out what it is that matters to you. What do you want to say, and how do you want to say it? And if you can't say it the way that you thought made sense to you, you may come to find it's, oh no, I don't actually believe this. I was trying to prove to myself that, or in trying to prove to others that they should think this way, I actually proved the opposite to myself, like no. And then maybe that turns into a new story. But the point is, this whole process is such a personal experience, and that's why I think it works. It's that you've got one human subjective experience of the world, and they're trying to convey that to others. And in it's such a personal individual experience to write something, to write a story like that. And yeah, there are very few ways or other activities that I could do that would help me clarify my own thinking than writing stories. And I would say that people who are even struggling, going through things that are hard, and they're feeling emotional, trying to write a story about it can really be a great therapeutic practice too.
There is so much for me to unpack here once I listen to this back, because it's one of my favorite things to do. But is there anything else you want to touch on or go into here before I have to let my brain rack through this whole experience? Because I might have just found a whole new way to cope and deal with any experiences that I have in my life.
Well, I think the only other thing that's on my mind is, I was brought up in such a way where I was taught to the kind of job I wanted was going to be a technical job. Like these are the best kinds of jobs you can get. This is what pays the best money. This is the people who succeed in the world are good at the technical skills, and you're kind of steered away from more of the creative disciplines. But I feel like I was a lot more creative when I was younger, And then only in like high school did I like flip this switch to like, oh hey, turns out I'm good at math, like maybe I can do engineering things. And then I did that, and it's like that was helpful, and I think it's good to have technical skills in an age that is this technologically advanced. But the more that I learn about writing and the more that I work on this as a skill, the more respect I have for the creative professions, because it is, I think, a lot harder than technical skills. And that's saying something, because I know the people who are really creative might say, like, there's no way I could even attempt at doing technical things. But to me, it feels like if you spent the time and you just learn the rules, like eventually you could pick it up. Probably it's not that bad. It seems maybe a lot, but like I don't know. There's a very obvious path, I think, of what it takes to learn these things. How do you teach someone to be a good writer? Like it's just you can. There's some stuff you can do. We can learn about story structure. We can have discussions like this, but at the end of the day, what it means to be a writer is to find your voice and figure out how to say things in your voice, the things you want to say in your own voice, and that is a skill that I think, yeah, is significantly more challenging than something technical.
I think this that you made a distinction between learning technical skills and creative skills, and it seems like this is like my attempt at trying to do one of your one-liners is that when you're trying to learn a technical skill, you have to learn that there are rules, and when you're trying to learn the creative skills, you have to learn that there should be no rules.
Yeah, right. Or something like when we're learning, like there are some rules, but it's like I feel like the point of learning the rules in writing is to figure out like, okay, when do I break these to be effective? Because you want to tell stories that are familiar to people in structure, but you don't want to give them something that's hard that they've already seen. You want something new, and sometimes that means breaking a rule in an unexpected way, or doing something different. But it's like, yeah, you get some framework, some structure in place, and then you have to do something that is uniquely you. And I feel like that's the whole point, is that there's there's so much more room in subjective expression than disciplines that are much more about direct problem solving.
I think that's a good way to put it. I think that's a wonderful way to wrap it up and close, because I think that that whole story was that you told was very impactful, and that was quite interesting. So I had a blast talking about this, and I hope that we can revisit this once you finish your current endeavor that you are on with the screenwriting.
Absolutely, it was a lot of fun.
Alrighty. Well, if you guys enjoyed this episode, you can find us at The Wrong Idea on Instagram, TikTok, and X. Until next time, keep thinking.
Got a thought that challenges the norm? We want to hear it. Post your wrong idea with the hashtag Wrong Idea. That's RONG idea. And join the conversation. Who knows? Your perspective might just be featured in a future episode. Remember, in a world of endless perspectives, all ideas are wrong ideas. Until next time, keep thinking, keep challenging, and keep embracing the unconventional.